Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining me here for this part of our program. I am very grateful for your presence. I'm going to be talking about the habit of happiness and breaking that up into, first of all, what is happiness? And then what are habits and how do we make them and break them and change them? And then moving into one of my favorite happiness habits, which is mindfulness. I may split it up into a couple of different videos depending on how long it gets, but those will be what I'm covering. So to get started, I'm going to put myself down here in the corner, and then I want to just share with you a couple of statistics, some research statistics that answer the question like why this even matters, why all of this that we're talking about, happiness and all of these habits for it and how to increase it is so important. And there are a couple studies that are relevant specifically to education, but these, of course, can be expanded out into all of our lives, right? So there was a 2-year school-based positive psychology program. Now, positive psychology is a part of psychology that seeks to optimize our experience of life. And so that is what and it's grounded in the science of happiness, which is everything that we are talking about in this series. So there was a 2-year school-based positive psychology program, so a longitudinal study, lasted a while, and at the end of it, it showed an increase for students in well-being that included more positive emotions, better peer relations, and better grade point averages, which is something we know all of our students would certainly be happy for, and we as their support systems would certainly be happy about. But even if we're not, teaching, or we're not students, or we're not in the education system, but even in our own lives, to be able to take these same ideas and increase our positive emotions and better our relationships, who couldn't want that, right? There was another research study at UC Santa Barbara that looked at a 2-week mindfulness program, which is something I'm going to be talking about. And this program showed for students an increase in GRE scores by 30%, and that's quite significant. And so if we take that and extrapolate it to kind of all testing, then, hey, that's fabulous. Improves working memory, which who can't use that, and decreases mind wandering, which is something I'll talk more about why that might be so important to us. Okay, so those are just some things to show you that there are thousands of studies out there on all of these topics and ideas, and these are just a couple that are very relevant to education. So as we get started, what I would love you to do is just sit back and relax and take a breath, get quiet, and if you're comfortable, you might want to close your eyes for a moment. If not, that's perfectly okay. Also, maybe have something near you to write with, because the first thing I want you to do is just think about the following statement that I'm going to make. And I just want you to see what are the first words that come into your mind to fill in the blank of this statement, which is, a happy life is a blank life. So how would you fill in that blank? What are the first words that come to you that define a happy life for you? Just maybe write down anything that comes to mind. And then imagine for a moment that you are living that happy life. What does it look like? How does it feel? What does happiness really feel like for you? Feel free to turn off the video and write down some ideas for that to get a sense of how you come to this defining happiness. I'm going to talk about some ways we can and also kind of maybe the way that we're looking at it for this program. But I think it's a worthy moment to think about it for yourself. So go ahead, turn off the video if you'd like. If not, we'll move on. So here we're looking at what is happiness and how you define that. And here's an idea for it. This is a quote. This was quoted by Sean Aker, who's a Harvard researcher on happiness, but he says it comes from the ancient Greeks. So it says, the joy we feel striving for our potential. And I just thought that was lovely. The joy we feel striving for our potential. So it speaks of it as being a journey and not a destination. It also speaks of it as being something really within us, not something that we get from the outside. And that it's based on moving towards that which brings out our own best self in life. that moving towards our own individual and unique potential. And then here's a little something from Aristotle just to think about. He talked about eudaimonia, which is the doing and living well. And it defines happiness through a focus on meaning and purpose. And that self-realization piece could be that potential of our own. But to understand that potential, as it's used in the world, like what is its meaning and what is its deeper purpose? So we start to see happiness as not being about being happy all the time, because that's not even realistic, but about something maybe deeper than that. And as you think about that, to consider the difference between happiness and pleasure. And then maybe even ask yourself if you or anybody you know ever seems to confuse the two. And when I ask this question of audiences, I often get, pleasure is short-term, it's short-lived. It's usually external to ourselves, something we do or have or want that we feel makes us happier. And I'm not anti-pleasure. It's just getting a sense of the difference. Where happiness is something that's a little more deeply felt. And that even though we can be unhappy at times, or we can feel sadness or anger, but that we could still have this idea of happiness within us. So taking all this into consideration, I came up with this. A state of being grounded in attributes that serve a sense of meaning and the overall well-being of the individual. So it's a state of being, something deeply within us. It has attributes or things that help grow that or create that, which is what we're going to be talking about throughout this whole series. And that those are things that serve a greater meaning in our lives as well as our own health and well-being. So you can think about that, play along with that a little bit, and see what you think. As we kind of move on to talk, a little farther about the state of happiness and what are those attributes. So if you look at these, I have the words innate traits there. If you have happiness at the top of a pyramid and it's the pinnacle, have all of these other things beneath it that go into the creation of that. Now this term emotional agility, you would probably see more often as resilience, but I really like this idea of emotional agility. Resilience can feel like, I'm just going to power through. Where emotional agility has that sense of flexibility no matter what is going on, that I can be with it and move through it. Optimism, kindness, generosity, awareness, which we'll talk about with mindfulness, positive connections, so many studies that show how important that is, our relationships in our lives, and that deeper sense of purpose, right? So are these innate traits? Are these just things that you're born with? Oh my gosh, they're just always so positive and happy and resilient, and I'm not that way. Is that the case? Or are they learnable skills? Because I think we tend to think of them as fixed traits. And the truth is that we are born with different levels of these. Some infants come out certainly more agile, able to deal with surroundings and situations a little better than others, more optimistic. Some children have, higher levels of that naturally. But I want to start this out with the understanding that just like we may not be great at math starting out, that we can learn the skills of it, that we learn to ride a bike, these are just emotional skills that we can learn. And so I think there's value in understanding that these are skills. So I would like you to just think for a moment before we move on deeper into habits. Do you have any happiness habits already? Because if you think of these as learnable skills, what is a skill, something that you do, that you practice a lot, that you do over and over again until it becomes automatic? Well, it's a habit, right? That's what it is. That's how we define a habit. It's a learned behavior, something we do over and over again until it's automatic. So, do you have right now anything you would consider a happiness habit in your life? Like throughout your week on a regular basis. So this might be another place to pause the recording and think about that, or write some things down. What are your current happiness habits? And then ask yourself and be sure, are they pleasure habits or happiness habits? Now, how do you know the difference? And not that some pleasure can't lead to deeper happiness, but if it's something that a pleasure habit, once done, might leave us feeling worse or guilty or needing of wanting more of it in order to be okay. That's a pleasure habit. A happiness habit is something that really builds our ability to be emotionally agile, to be optimistic, to feel a sense of greater inner well-being. So what are your happiness habits? So think about that for a minute. And then we're going to move on to what are, habits in general. So we just defined them as something you do over and over again until it's automatic. So let's take that into the brain for a moment. What's going on in our brain when we learn a habit? So I would ask you wherever you are to just freeze. And notice for a minute how you're sitting. Are your legs crossed? Are your ankles crossed? Are your feet on the floor? What's your posture like? Kind of notice what your body does when it just naturally sits down. Okay? And now I'd like you to put your feet on the floor, roll your shoulders up, back, and down. Tuck your chin just so your neck is in alignment with your spine, lifting the crown of your head up to the ceiling. And then sit comfortably but not rigid. Just relax, but straight. So does this feel natural? Well, maybe not. Because what happens in your brain when you learn anything or when you do anything is that all the neurons involved in doing that thing fire and wire at the same time, right? So they fire and wire at the same time and until they build like a network. And the first time they do it, that network may be really weak. It's, all the muscle, the muscle, motor neurons, the emotional neuron, everything going on in your body kind of fires and wires at the same time to build that network. And then when you do it over and over again, that becomes stronger and stronger until you have like a hardwired habit. Now we call this neuroplasticity, right? The brain is plastic. It can be molded and shaped by what you do. It can also be molded and shaped by what you think and what you experience, and through new learning. We used to think that once we reached 18, it was just permanent. Whatever was there, that's how it was. Now we know throughout the life, the brain changes based on what we learn and what we do. It likes our habits because it's easy. It doesn't have to work very hard. But that's what happens when you create a habit. So, I often ask people, like, do you have a habit you would like to break? And usually I'll get yes. And, the one that people are most comfortable sharing is nail biting. But all the habits that people will say are behaviors. And the truth is, if you think about neuroplasticity, a lot of those habits that we want to break that are behavioral started out differently. They started out as thoughts or emotions. And they got wired in. So we were nervous. And we started biting our nails, and all of a sudden it told the brain, oh, that feels a little bit better. And it wired that activity into what it does when it's nervous. It's nervous network. It's nervous network. And so that became something that we do constantly. But we also have habits of thinking and feeling that are wired into us just as strongly as any behavior. They are patterns of repetitive thinking and repetitive feeling. The more we think the same thoughts, the more we feel the same way towards certain situations, the more that becomes a habit and a go-to, right? And these patterns can either lead to our happiness or our anxiety or our any other state of being that they support, right? So we're going to do a little activity. So if you have something to write on, I'm going to give you a scenario and I'm going to ask you to write down the first thing that comes to mind. So here we go. If you are walking down the hall and in front of you, you see someone coming towards you that you have positive feelings about, and you prepare to wave and say hi. And then as they pass you, they kind of glance at you, look away, and keep going. What is the first thought that comes to your mind? So take just a moment and write that down. You can pause the video. And once you've got that first thought, what is the emotion that goes along with that thought? You just jot that down. You can pause the video. And then what is the action that thought and emotion tend to want to make you do kind of automatically? Right? Okay. So if we were in a group together, I would say, kind of share some of your thoughts. I usually get, they don't like me. There's something wrong with me. I get like, jerk, what's wrong with you? Or I get, confused, or I don't understand what just happened, or neutral. They didn't see me. They don't know, whatever. And a lot of times, whatever it is, especially if it's one of the first two, anger or rejection, it's this sense of withdrawing from the person that begins to happen. And then the question becomes, what is the only thing? Sorry. So sorry about that. My dog. So the question becomes, what is the only thing you know to be true about why that happened? And the answer? You have no idea. You don't know why they acted like that. But we have thoughts that, come into mind automatically, like narratives that we tell ourselves based on our own experiences, our own wiring, or how our wiring has met our experience. And so those, then that tends to dictate how we respond. But if you knew the truth was, say you found out that person had just gotten the worst news of their lives and they're barely hanging on, that might change the way you respond to them. Okay? So it's about trying to figure out, trying to understand that we have kind of go-to habits of mind that lead us to potentials, right? All right, I'm going to put myself back in here. So we have to think about our habits of mind as much as our behaviors, right? So this is just that activity. There's another thing the brain tends to do that can cause, unfortunate habits in us sometimes. It has a negativity bias. And what that simply means is that the brain is Velcro for the negative and Teflon for the positive. We tend to hold on to negative experience and negative thinking. You get a new hairstyle and 10 people tell you how great you look, and one person looks looks at you sideways, says something snarky. And what do we tend to remember or hold on to? So, and that served us well in evolution, because if we missed a chance for something good, we could survive to see it again. But if we missed a chance for a threat, then we couldn't. But this doesn't serve us so well in our day and age all the time, right? Because if those stories are social and emotional, then those negativities, and we kind of stick to them, that can be a little bit that can cause us some issues with our habits. Another one is what I call story spinning. So this is that constant ruminating, and we spin a story about why people acted like they did in the hallway. That's really what that is, right? What might, could, should, might happen. So I often do with students, I'll talk about, if you find out there's going to be a party on Tuesday, there's going to be a party on Saturday, but you find out about it on Tuesday, and somebody you have strong emotion, negative or positive, about is going to be there. When do you start thinking about it? How much of your energy do you put towards that? All the mights, coulds, shoulds, woulds, what's going to happen? And this can happen in anything, right? We have a meeting with our boss and we roll through what that could mean. And these stories can limit us or expand us. It kind of just depends on what our potential stories are, right? So the next part that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to do it in another video, is how do we make changes at last? How do we move towards a more positive bias? How do we stop that story spinning? How, do we work with our brain and its natural mechanisms to build healthy, happy habits? So join me in my next video. Thank you.